Hello everybody and welcome back to Chapter Tactics, where we talk about tactics and strategies to help both new and veteran players alike. I am your host, Magic Arpuse Fly, also known as Matt, and with me today you'll notice that we don't have our regular co-hosts in Demeki and John P. Decided to give them a little bit of a break and just do a very intimate talk with this man, this myth, this legend, Skari.
I'm ready. And I'm surprised this didn't come sooner.
Yeah, so this episode we wanted to just kind of like focus a lot on the nitty-gritty of Drukhari, where they're at now, where they came from, how it's like your journey has been playing them since you first started playing them, all the way up to 9th edition current times with Custodes and Tau out. And we're just going to go over just like all this stuff, all this information, pick at your brain since you are, such a veteran player that's been playing for such a long time. You have so much information that you could just kind of vomit onto people, right? So
yeah, it's intimidating for probably any of the newer players who listen to this podcast at times when we just start blasting off random jargon and you're like, I don't even understand half of these terms. But don't worry, you will get there. I'm looking forward to talking about it. That goes all the way to before it was called Drukhari, and it was the Dark Eldar.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing all of that stuff today, but before we get started, as always, this episode is brought to you by FrontlineGaming.org, where you can get amazing game mats for not just your 40k games, but almost any tabletop game out there. Purchase miniatures at a discount, and join some of the largest 40k events in the industry. Some cool stuff that's coming out right now. BAO, that is coming up. LSO, get your tickets now. ACO, get that as well. There's so much cool stuff that's happening. LVO tickets are going to start being sold at around June as well. You have Cruise Hammer coming up. So much cool events that are happening for the 40k industry, especially from FLG. All these events that are coming out, go pick them up. Joining an FLG event is like one of the coolest things that you can do in 40k, because they host just like really, really good events, good tournaments. It's a good time. Even if you're not playing competitively, just come join, have a good time, play with people, join the friendlies, check out all the armies that are being played. It's a good time. So now that that's out of the way, let's get started. We have a couple of questions that I would just want to throw at you. But the first one that we're going to go with is just give us a general rundown of how long you've actually been playing Drukhari for.
I've been playing Drukhari since, I want to say, 4th edition Warhammer 40k. Which was, I want to say, 15 years ago. It's been a long time.
15 years?
Yeah, about
That's
that.
Crazy. Wow. Dude.
Yeah, it's. I started playing them shortly after the 4th edition. 4th edition came out. I was playing my Black Templars because I played them forever, and then Dark Eldar was like the next project. I experimented for a while. I had some Necrons, I had Chaos, I had some Tyranids. I played with a couple of different factions, but then Dark Eldar just jumped out at me, and my whole game group said the Dark Eldar were terrible, so that I could never win with them. So I decided, why not try that and prove everybody wrong?
So it was one of those things where you're just like, oh, I'll show you how good Drukhari can be. So it was like almost resentment is why you chose onto them.
And it's been like that ever since. I tend to, in the terms of I like playing with off the cuff, non quote unquote meta stuff a lot of the time. And I play a lot with it to sort of like find ways to make it work instead of, I just make it hard for myself. It's just a very specific style of playing. Do you ever read that article about like Magic players? There was like 3 different types of Magic players.
Oh, yeah.
4 different types, was it? Remember that article?
Yeah.
Like there was a Johnny and the Spike and the what? I don't remember the names.
It's funny because you see those same verbiages still happening now, like people saying Johnny and everything. Like I remember reading that article and seeing somebody say a Johnny when we're talking about 40k, and I'm just like, I know I heard that from somewhere. Yeah, so like it completely blew my mind when I first heard about it, or when I first saw it.
Well, that is translated into 40k in a lot of ways. Like every player can sort of that categorization of player lends itself to 40k quite well, and I feel that that's me. And Drukhari at that time, with Dark Eldar at that time, were an army that even then was like fringe. the models were considered even back then to be pretty bad and old.
Yeah.
And like you'd go into the hobby shop and there'd be Dark Eldar stuff, like Cavalite warriors, the witches that were in blisters at the time because they were metal models, the raiders and the ravagers, and they were like just covered in dust because nobody ever touched them or removed them from shelves. And that's when I started, back then.
Okay, all right. And you said that so they weren't even like the first army that you played, right? Like you were testing out things like Necrons and other armies. Like how did that? How come you didn't gravitate towards those guys more?
So what happened was a combination of things. So you know how everything lines up when you really like something's going to happen to you, and sometimes you start an army or collect something because somebody gives you a model or gives you like some models they're not using or like a book or something, and it just kind of you end up going that way because you might as well since you already have some stuff.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like that. I had like 1,000 points in Necrons. I had like a monolith and a couple of warriors, and I got like some Tyranid stuff, and I had like there's some chaos things that I was working on. Some orcs I even owned, and I played in Stratford, Ontario, which we had our gaming group, the Stratford Gaming Union. It was really fun. A lot of blue collar factory workers. It was really funny. We used to hang out in Bill's garage, and we used to play like every weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, from like 10 p.m. to like 5 a.m. in the morning. And
that's so much.
Every weekend, and they'd be chain smoking in this tiny little garage. I remember like just always leaving like with my eyes just like burning red, my lungs like hurting so much. And one of the players, Mike, was getting rid of a bunch of Dark Eldar stuff because he had like a bunch of Cavalite warriors just foot, just like 60 Cavalite warriors that he just wasn't using, and had all the like dark lances and the blasters and all the like kits that were hard to find at that time because they were like blister packs that you had to buy for it. And I ended up kind of like appropriating them because he wasn't using, so he gave them away. And then I ended up using and having like a big collection of Dark Eldar to run. And I started running like a whole bunch of random just army lists with a bunch of troops.
Yeah.
But as soon as I had enough models to run full army lists, I started getting hooked in the play style, and I really enjoyed it. And then back in the day, we had
back
things
in
called,
my day.
back in the day, we had things called forums online. And,
oh my goodness! Like Daka, like what was it? Was it Daka Daka? Yeah,
Daka Daka. There's a variety of different ones, and so I'd spend hours and hours reading Dark Eldar Tacticas, right? just pages and pages, like because back in the day there was this like thing where depending on how many points you played, you wanted to have so many dark lance weapons per so many points. So the key was how many dark lances and blasters could you physically put in per 100 points that you had, and the average was about 2. You could put about 2 dark lances in, or maybe 2.5 for every 100 points in your army, and that was like the standard.
Yeah. So like for 2,000
really
points,
into like that.
So you're saying that for 2,000 points, you could have 2,000 divided by 100? That's 200. So like 200 dark lances is what
No, by 20, right?
20?
So
is it 20?
It was about 20 to 25 dark lances or blasters in 2,000 points, and that was like, and if you could do that, you had a competitive Dark Eldar list back then.
Yeah. So I guess going from there, like how was it? Going from where you started at with Drukhari to now. I mean, like now you're like obviously now you're like a way bigger influencer in just 40K in general now, being Skari. Everybody knows who Skari is in the 40K scene. So like, adding that onto the conversation as well, like how has it been going from where you started to now basically with this army?
It's been a lot of being very dog-headed.
yeah.
I want to say stubborn. Well, what happened was, because I played a lot, like 4th edition, 5th edition, 6th edition. I went to a lot of tournaments. I really started building the Dark Eldar, and then there was a period of time between like 6th and 7th like that whole period of time where I did go to events and I played with what was considered like a terrible Dark Eldar sort of like book, or like the rules mechanics, like 6th edition, unless you like did the wacky crazy, like in 6th edition there was some mechanics where you could like get Farseers to summon demons to the table.
What?
Right? Yes. So
what? That's crazy. Okay.
Yeah, so 40k went for weird like loop where you had like Necrons allying with Tyranids, and
because you had that ally system, right?
Yeah, the allied
the
chart
grid
was crazy. You had you had Riptides that were monster units that could make units, because back in the day you could add characters to units, so you could add like a character to a Riptide, or Tau commander to a you could add a Tau commander to a Wraith Knight, and they'd be a little unit.
What? That's freaking insane! Are you kidding me? So I could have brought I could have brought something like a Hive Tyrant with a bunch of gaunts. Like, is that what you're trying to say?
You could have. No, Hive Tyrants were monsters, so they weren't independent characters, so they couldn't attach to units. But like certain independent characters could attach to units, and if you had a monster unit that was like typed like a Wraith Knight or a Riptide, you could attach an independent character to that unit, and then they would get all the rules that the commander would give their units, because commanders used to give, instead of auras and buffs, they just gave bonuses to the unit they were attached to. Anyway, so
that's crazy.
Let's just say Warhammer 40,000 has had many ups and downs.
Yeah. That sounds
6th edition only lasted like a year and a half. Like, it did not last very long because it was really crazy.
Yeah.
And June 7th edition, like, this was the age of giving all armies a lot of free stuff. So, Space Marines had what were called battle companies, where if you took basically 4 tactical squads, 2 assault squads, 2 devastators, like essentially like a battle company, like legit, like from the lore, you got all the dedicated transports for free. And they were all OPSEC or something crazy like
this sounds insane. This sounds like Death Watch, but just everybody, like, like the kill teams in Death Watch, where you just kind of like mix and match stuff. It sounds like that, but just for everybody.
Yeah, so and then 7th, so I really made a name for myself, I feel, during that time when people started to notice the fact that I still played Dark Eldar, and I played like what was considered a crappy army, and like did okay with them. Like, I wasn't going to any of the big events competitively. Like, I wasn't going to Adepticon because I was literally a workaholic who was trying to create a sales business. And I literally had no life. Like, I worked 80-hour weeks.
Yeah.
And all I did was every once in a while put like a battle report up every week. Right. And that's the thing. I've just put a battle report every week up for like 10 years. You know what I mean? Like, that's literally what I've done. And I played with like random stuff like mandrakes, and like I still played with like Reaver jet bikes, and I always found that no matter how crazy the meta was, I could always play the missions and play to win the game instead of just chasing this crazy, constantly changing meta. And I said, it's a lot easier for me as a person, and it's a lot easier to try and stay sane when things change so much, to keep something concrete and like as a foundation, so that I have like this something to fall back on when things get so crazy. At least I have that knowledge of like a faction that I can always like rely on to kind of like push off into the crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's just almost like a comfort pick type of thing, right? Like, you're just comfortably playing Drukhari. You know the ins and outs of them. You read them all the time. You play them all the time. And that knowledge that you have of being so comfortable with this army through all these different editions, and knowing, all the good stuff that's happening with the army and things that you can use in order to play the mission well, is way more valuable than just jumping on whatever is the hottest army. Right.
And don't get me wrong, like anybody who's listening out there, if you enjoy meta chasing, which is something that a lot of people enjoy, they'll enjoy finding out what the newest, bestest thing is. They love building it quickly, getting it painted quickly, or not even getting it painted, and just playing it. Right. And then as soon as that's not in vogue, they either sell it or store it or do whatever they want, and then just do it with the next one. And that's just as valid as like what I would say is like my style, which is like having a concrete control group. It's, in my opinion, like playing Drukhari for so long has allowed me to treat the Dark Eldar, the Drukhari faction, as sort of like that control group in a scientific experiment. And I tell this to like coaching clients all the time when I work with them. It's 40K has so many variables as a game. Mm-hmm. Like so many variables. Not only do you have to roll dice to see what happens, right? But you're playing a different mission, you're picking secondaries, and then the variables include your mood, right? They include your opponent and how they interact, what their list is, what warlord traits, what leadership, what relics they took, what combination of units, what the terrain looks like on the table, right? Who goes first, who goes second, who deployed first. There's so many variables. But one of the only ways that you can get good at the game is by keeping something like a list or a faction consistent over time. Because then over time, if you keep one thing consistent, if one thing could be consistent, then you can learn how that adapts to the variables opposed onto it, right? Yeah. And then you just get better at predicting what's going to happen, right? And therefore, you just get better at it.
Yeah. It's definitely like I feel that on another level with all the armies that I play, you know, like with Tyranids when we were starting off in like 8th edition, you know, I know that that's not like as veteran as what you're saying since, you know, 4th edition, but coming from somewhere where it's like 8th edition with Tyranids, which weren't in a very good spot. But it was the only army that I had, and I loved them so much. I kept playing them over and over again. And then it felt like, you know, even when I was fighting against 9th edition armies, when those codexes started coming out, I always felt like I had some type of option to still play the mission correctly and still pull out wins, even though, you know, sometimes you'll have to use more of your brain power, right, compared to like another army. But you have that, what you were saying, like that constant data that you can always use.
Yeah, it's like data points, right? Yeah. And, you know, it's like putting everything into a spreadsheet over 20 years and going, okay, you know, every time I take this relic or this warlord trait or this sort of mechanic, and you just get a better feel for it. You become a faction expert, right? And that's and once you get to that point, it's easier for you to adapt with the times. And you might be playing with like, you know, outdated rule mechanics or outdated stratagems, and you might be seeing all this new stuff. Right? You know, exactly. You know exactly how that feels because you have had to do it. And I'm pretty sure a lot of folks who are listening, you know, you've done that as well. Like you're playing, you love this one faction and you really enjoy how it plays, but then you see like the current state of Tau Custodes, right? And, you know, and the thing is, a lot of folks might not even play that anytime. They might not even face it in their local meta. Right? They might not have any players that go to their like house and bring 9 broadsides or whatever, because they wouldn't be invited back to their house, right? So it's you know, it's more about the general like mentality out there when you look at the meta and go, ooh, that's scary, you know, and it's always good to know your own faction because then you can go, okay, what do I have in my book, even though it's old and the mechanics are a little wonky and I don't have as many stratagems. What kind of things or tools do I have that would give me a chance? Like I still have to play really well. It's not going to be easy, but I'm going to try my best, right? To like make something work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So moving on from there, because we could talk about this for like such a long time because it's just like a fascinating conversation just to have, right? But moving on from there, the way that Drukari is right now, you know, like the 9th edition Drukari book was extremely polarizing, you know. It had one of the highest win rates that we've ever seen in 40K history in like recent years, you know. So how was it dealing with that community outrage, especially since you were starting from 4th edition where it was an army that just wasn't very good to now becoming an army that was like insanely oppressive towards people? Like, how did you handle that outrage?
Well, first of all, that was going up to the Codex release, that was like my biggest fear.
Yeah.
And I said this many times in podcasts. I was like, my biggest fear is that the Codex is going to be crazy good and then everybody's going to play it. I stopped playing Drukhari. I played Black Templars.
Understandable. And then their Codex came out and you're like, oh yeah, I guess
And, they weren't like crazy. They weren't as crazy as Drukhari. You know what I mean? So like every once in a while, I'd play Drukhari if I was like practicing for Team Canada or like doing some like hard like competitive stuff. Of course, I took my Dark Eldar because I was going to a tournament and just playing. And at the end of the day, I have no shame. I've been playing Dark Eldar for 15 years. If my codex is good for like, what was it, 8 months?
Yeah,
sure. 8 months out of 15 years, I'll take it. Right. And I feel like it's kind of morphed to a very healthy book, at least right now in the current situation. I feel it has strengths, but it's not like overpowering. But it was hard. Like I even made like this whole video about talking about how I felt guilty for playing like the faction that I love so much.
Yeah.
Because and Tau players must feel the same. Even some like dedicated Custodes players must feel that right now, where they're like, everybody's like judging me for playing the faction that I've literally had in my collection forever. And but it does feel that like when you show up to it, like I played a lot of events or games where I'd show up, I'd have my list that wasn't really that different from lists I had run before the Codex, but now it was just amped up to like
1,000.
13.
Yeah,
it was just crazy. And you just like move, they'd have one turn, and then you'd murder their whole army. And that was literally like how it worked. And it depressed people. And so it wasn't easy to kind of, I felt like I had to be on the same page with my opponent. If it was a highly competitive event, they expected to see Drukhari there, and I would play like full Drukhari. But if it was like pickup games or games with friends, like I rarely used my Drukhari. Or I played like games with like old beasts or something, like just random silly units that you never see.
And something that like is actually pretty interesting about this is that usually when you look at something where something is very strong, you need to get practice with them at like, as much as possible. But because this is an army that you've been playing since 4th edition, it comes back to what you were saying before, where you have so much knowledge of this army already and the way that they play that like you really don't need that much practice with that army because it's a comfort pick. And so, you specifically are able to play these other armies, with your friends and not have to practice so much with this Drukhari army, right? Is that like something that makes sense for you? Or
that's the same with other factions as well. Not just, that doesn't just apply to me, but it applies to anybody out there who has played the same faction forever. I find that sometimes some of the most challenging games at tournaments are against people who have a hobby collection of a faction they've been playing for 20 years. And they literally bring this hodgepodge, or what looks like a hodgepodge army, to an event, right?
Yeah.
And you go up against it, and it's got like one of everything from the Codex and a random warlord trait, and they just play it really, really well because they've just been playing that faction forever. And it's not like the quote-unquote meta choice that you would expect from reading articles and looking at BCP and like going on to like the Meta Mondays and all that stuff, right? So it's it's the same with any faction, I find.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like taking an army that you're just very, very comfortable with and bringing it up to the table, like it's one of the reasons why I know that I shouldn't be afraid of them, quote unquote, right? I shouldn't be afraid of this army. But like whenever I see something like Chaos Space Marines at the table, I get afraid because I have no idea what they do. And like, they'll just start pulling stuff out of their butt. Like this has the Mark of Slanesh, and I'm just like, I don't know what that means. And like, they'll just pull out some crazy combos that you just don't see anywhere because they're so in love with this faction. And I think that that's so cool.
Yeah, it is overwhelming as well because, some factions have some kick to them still, but you need to like dig through like 5 publication books to like pull out the best. And that's a topic for a whole other conversation about like, but like I'm playing a live stream tomorrow. And I decided to play AdMech. I'm going to play AdMech. And I decided, it'd be fun. I'm going to play Metallica. And I'm going to add a Raven Knight to the Metallica list so that I can give it Canticles. Because then you can give it Canticles, you can heal it. Like there's a whole bunch of cool rules interactions. But I'm looking at a stack of 5 books to do this.
Yeah.
I'm like, anyway.
Yeah, no, dude, you're talking to someone that plays Tyranids, man. Like right now, we have more books that we have to use than AdMech. So
And a
it's
white
like,
dwarf.
and a white dwarf. Yeah, you can't scratch that. And like even playing Harlequins, I have to use a white dwarf, and I'm just like, man, maybe I should just get a subscription to white dwarf at this point because all my rules keep coming out in it. So. You know, Drukhari was very polarizing when it came out. However, now Drukhari has been hit with with nerfs multiple times, but still survived off of those nerfs. Like, what do you think this was? Why do you think that happened? Like, what was that? The reasoning behind that, and are you happy about that being a thing?
So your question is why has it survived?
Yeah, all these multiple nerfs. Yeah, and still been a top performing faction.
I think there's a variety of reasons. Number one, I feel like the new Drukhari Codex is a very healthy, internally balanced book. So what happened is, and one of the reasons they had so many nerfs was because they kept on nerfing things, but then all the Drukhari players just moved to another of the good options in the book. And then just overused that option. So first it was like liquefire guns, and then everybody went to like -1 damage, Talos and Grotesques, and then, or like Cult of Strife Witches, and then they like nuked the witches, and then Rax became a thing. And then, so I feel like because of the fact that they made it's like 3 codexes in one, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons, is it's hard to balance all 3 factions in that book together without making and all of the options are quite good. It just shows you how much they were able to kind of tweak it, and it still has some life in it, right? The Strife supplement is still incredibly powerful for witch cult units. The addition of now Harlequins, being able to like put in Harlequins to a Drukhari detachment and stay Drukhari is incredible, considering how powerful Harlequins are. But like from a meta standpoint, but I find it's because just Dark Eldar play the game of 9th edition really well.
Yeah.
We're fast, we're maneuverable, we can score points and deny our opponent points. So we play the primary decently, we play the secondary game decently. We have one of the best secondaries in the game with Herd to Prey, mathematically speaking, and we play the missions well. And with the advent of like player optimized terrain, or like people actually using better terrain at events like obscuring and larger ruins and things like that, we have an army that almost flies everywhere, so it doesn't really require a lot of like linear movement avenues, and it can fly over things, and it advances and charges, and it's super fast, and there's a bunch of little OBSEC units, and so we just play the missions well.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very I know that this sounds weird to say, but it's a very balanced codex, right? Like it's very in depth. It's very there's so much that you can dig into with that codex, and I think that's the biggest strength that the Drukhari Codex has. And I would even go on to say things like even Death Guard. Death Guard has a great codex. It's very, very balanced. It's very in depth, and it's fluffy too. And I recently just started thinking about this as well. That GW. I know that a lot of people don't like how GW is balancing the game, and I understand that. And to a degree, I feel like that they are correct. However, I think that the codexes that they're recently coming out with feels great for the person that's playing it. Like that's playing these codexes, because it really speaks to the army nowadays, right?
Yeah, they are doing a great job capturing the feeling of the faction.
Yeah, like even Tau. Yeah. Tau feels great. Like it feels like how it should be.
It feels like Tau. Yeah, it feels like Tau. Drukhari feels like Drukhari. Eldar, playing Eldar feels like Eldar, like Craftworld. Death Guard definitely feels like a Death Guard should be. Slow, methodical, tough. And they've been nailing that aspect of it. Yeah. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, it's just something that I think is very interesting. Talking about having an army or a codex that is very balanced. Grey Knights, for example, was an army with pretty much like 2 data sheets that really helped push the army towards that top tier level. But after getting some nerfs, they've been knocked down a peg or two. They're still strong, but they got knocked down a peg or two because, they nerfed the 2 data sheets that were really good for the army. How do you feel about armies with codices that aren't, like as in depth as the Drukhari book?
It's like power is power, but unless you have flexibility in the builds, that power stagnates.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like, for example, with Harlequins, they are very powerful, but they have 2 builds or 3 builds. So as a player, I can assume to run into one of 3 builds when I play against Harlequins. So it's a lot easier for me to build tools into my list to target 3 builds. One of the reasons, Custodians are very strong, but you're only really seeing a couple of builds of Custodians. You got Dreadnoughts, you got Bikes, you got like Sagittarium spam if you play on TTS, because nobody owns 25 Sagittarium. But you like flexibility is more
key.
powerful in the long run.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. I do feel like armies like Grey Knights have a lot of flexibility. They have the potential to be flexible, but I feel like the creativity of list building went to a certain extent, and the online pundits, right, basically just said, "Hey, this is what Grey Knight is." Everybody ran that, and then when that wasn't Grey Knight, everybody went silent, and there hasn't really been any adaptation into finding something that works with Grey Knights anymore. Right? It's been very like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Custodians, everybody. So, I feel like it's a combination of things. Even with Drukhari, with Drukhari, you've seen like a cycle. It's like MSU builds, and it was like big blobs of stuff. Then it's now kind of cycle back to MSU. But I feel like within the Drukhari community, there's a lot of people constantly trying to find things that work within the Drukhari book. And so we get like a lot of really creative ideas, and we luckily have like the options for like Corsairs now and like Harlequins. Like, there's lots of different things you can add to that. Whereas with Grey Knights, other than like adding the Inquisition, or Assassins, like there's not really much in terms of that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely see that. I know that a lot of diehard people that play things like Grey Knights, they're still constantly trying to find ways that you can play them, right? It's just that like something like Nemesis Dread Knights, which were just like point for point, just like so efficient, and then having that be nerfed along with Interceptors that were just so good. Having those 2 units be nerfed, it's like it kind of hurts. But then when you compare that with other codices that have like, so many different options, right? Like Drukhari, you guys went from playing what you said, Raider spam in the beginning. You guys even had like a small Venom spam thing. You guys had Artists of Flesh, I believe that's what it was called, right? For
Dark Technomancer was first,
Dark
which was the
Technomancer.
Liquefiers.
Yeah,
and the Chronos, and then it was a mix with like Artists of the Flesh, and
So it's like all these crazy different builds that you can do. I just find that it's very interesting that that codex was so in depth, as much as people said that it was broken. It's just that it's like very balanced, and I feel like that's the reason why it was so strong.
I feel like that was a bit of a shame, because there was so much like fun stuff in the Drukhari codex, like the different obsessions, like the ones that you could build, like a Build-A-Bear obsessions, right? Or the actual like about the good ones were like outshun all of the other really fun ones so much that you only really saw those big 3: Strife, Dark Technomancer, Black Heart, that sort of thing. So, and it is a shame, but it's nice that things have been kind of like, I like it when they tone down things, because now people are like experimenting a bit with it as well, which is cool.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. After that, with the recent release of codexes, or I'm sorry, with the recent releases of Custodes and Tau, how have you been trying to deal with those guys playing with your Drukhari book?
So I have 2 modes, multiple modes of playing, but 2 modes of playing competitively. Like I play narrative and crusade stuff. I really enjoy that, and that's like a completely different ball game, even when you're playing against Custodes or Tau.
Yeah, it's completely different.
But competitively speaking, there's 2 ways that I prepare for events. I prepare for events at the team level, because as a member of the Canadian national team, and as a singles player, where Because at the national level, there's 8 players, and each codex can only be used once.
Yeah.
Which means I don't really get access to Harlequins and Eldar right now because they're a good book. So if, we probably want to have a player that is playing Harlequins and Eldar because they're in the same codex. So I can't really build around that. At the same time, at a team event level, I can sort of rely on my team to build into matchups that are bad for Dark Eldar. Like historically, Dark Eldar don't like playing against Tau because smart missile systems will kill everything in your army. Airburst fragmentation projectors will kill every Drukhari thing in your army. So if at all possible in a team-based environment, I don't have to play against that unless it's like the worst case scenario, in which case, well,
I'm full on sword and
take it for the team. But in a singles environment, what I've done is I've kind of like put in a couple of things in my Drukhari list that help me into the Tau matchup and into the Custodes matchup. And that's mainly being able to build into the last. Right. So number one, if you like Harlequins, I highly recommend you add a couple of like a patrol worth into your Drukhari. They give you access to the Shadow Seer, which then gives you access to something like Psychic Interrogation as a secondary, or the Void Weavers, which are great to the last choice, which much better than like a Ravager, for example. However, I have been using Hemoxites. I think they're a great tool to use. That's the upgraded racks that you get with an upgraded homunculus. I've been using a Master Homunculus with the Twisted Animator, so he brings back the Hemoxites. Great for backfield objective holding. I do give them a bunch of upgrades, so they become one of my to the last targets when I'm playing a mono faction. And then you can hide them, and they will survive a couple of rounds of shooting, especially from out of line of sight.
So for people that don't know the stat lines for a Hemozite, like, can you describe what makes them so good in your eyes to bring into your list?
Yeah, so racks are a unit that it's 8 points a model. They have power from pain, so 6 of the marble save. They are toughness 5, right? Okay. And when within toughness 4, but when within 6 inches of a homunculus, they become toughness 5. That's really so they're like a troop, right? So when you upgrade them to Hemoxites, you have to buy a 15-point upgrade for your homunculus, or 20-point upgrade for the homunculus, sorry. And then you pay 2 points per rack. So they're now 10 points a model. And it gives them, I believe, an extra leadership, I think. And then you've got their invulnerable save is improved by 1. So they have a 5-up invul. Now, anybody who doesn't know, or who knows math, knows that going from a 6-up save to a 5-up save, doubles your survivability just there.
Yeah.
And, they continue to be toughness 4/5, and they get to ignore the first failed save every phase.
Oh, okay. So they're just incredibly tanky for their points costs, right? For 10 points, you bring, it's a squad of 10 is the minimum?
So it's maximum 10. So 5 to 10.
Okay.
Bring a squad of 10, the T5, they have a 5-up, and then they also have a 5-up Feel No Pain on top of that. So, you have a 5-up with 10 guys there, and the homunculus can bring back D3 every command phase with the Warlord trait.
All right.
So if you keep them behind line of sight, you have to put some dedicated shooting to take them out, right? And a lot of the times it's not easy to get everything you need in range, and you can't just sporadically shoot at them with a little bit here, a little bit there, because then you just won't kill them.
Yeah.
And with Power from Pain, as soon as you hit that 4th turn, +1 to your Power from Pain invulnerable save, they go up to a 4-up invulnerable save. Oh. So they become a 4-up invul, 5-up Feel No Pain, ignore the first failed save every phase. So at that point, they become very, very tough to take down.
Okay, and you've been saying that that's the reason why you've been taking them for Custodes and Tau, is just because of their pure resilience and how cheap they are? Against
Tau, they're great because of the out of line of sight shooting. Right, so they're 10 strong, so they're not getting full blasted. They're high toughness, which really helps against a lot of the out of line of sight shooting from the Tau, and you have to dedicate a lot of shooting into them because they've got the Feel No Pain and the better invulnerable save. Yeah. And if your opponent doesn't deal with them quickly, then they become almost impossible to kill, later in the game.
Yeah. And then when it comes to custodes, it's just because it's harder for them to get to that back line, right? Is that
Yeah. Like into custodies, most custodies have been running a lot of like missiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been running prophets of the flesh, which means that if you're strength 7 or less into any of my cult coven stuff, you can never move wound me on better than a 4+. They're like mini transhuman.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that like bikes and stuff go in and they're hitting on 2s, but then they're only wounding them on 4s, which then means that they will survive more than likely, and gives me a chance to counteract what the custodians have sent into my backline.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's interesting. What other ways have you been dealing with them?
So the Court of the Archon has been one of my favorite units to use right now.
Oh yeah, those are the snake people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a single unit that can be made up of 4 different types of model. So you have the Slith, which are the snakes. They're the most popular. You have the Urgles, which are like little dog-style creatures. And then I take a Lamian in there. And you can have up to 4 of each model in the unit. So the court I run is 4 Slith, 4 Urgle, and a single Lamian, because the Lamian gives them leadership 8, plus Blackheart's leadership 9. This unit is 152 points.
It's pretty cheap.
It is 27 wounds.
Yep.
And they have a 5-up feel no pain as well, with 3 wounds on each model, essentially. Which makes multiple damage weapons very unreliable. They're also Cabal of Blackheart, which means they get their extra invulnerable save starting on turn 3. So then they would have a 5-up involved with a 5-up feel no pain with 3 wounds apiece. And the amount of times that this unit just soaks up just entire turns worth of my opponent's like attention is just worth its weight in gold.
Mm-hmm. For 150 points too. Like that's incredibly
It is incredible.
Cheap. Yeah, that's really, really good.
It's one of the best units point for point that you can find. It also has a bodyguard rule while you have any snake models in there, which gives you a lot of play into holding objectives in the open with like an Archon, by hiding the unit rule? Behind a wall. They do, yeah.
Wow. Man, that's so good for 150 points. That's nasty. I love that. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the secret sources, and they can advance and charge, and they have a lot of attacks. Like the 4 Urgles, when you charge, have 24 strength 4 attacks. Oh. They hit on 2s, reroll.
That is hilarious. Oh, yeah. That's nasty.
Oh yeah, they will murder stuff. Yeah. They're so good. Yeah. I love them so much.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
And then the last item that I've been using is I've put back in a unit of Trueborn into my lists, which is something I'd taken out for a while. But having another expensive unit that can sit in a raider in the backfield and just kind of take pot shots at stuff and not have to commit allows me to use more aggressive units like my Incubi and my Hellions to really go and do damage while they sort of like take the midboard.
Yeah, I do like that Hellions became more of a thing now with Drukhari. Like a lot of people are starting to take them a lot more now. They're good units. Like they're really cool. Earlier you started talking about Herd the Prey, and you know how Herd the Prey is like a very, very strong secondary. Do you still take that going into things like Custodes and Tau, where they're so resilient sometimes, and it's like hard to remove them from different table quarters?
Not against Custodes. Yeah, against Custodes, I rarely take Stranglehold or Herd the Prey. I usually take Engage, because I want to be as far away from the Custodes as humanly possible. Yeah. And I don't want to have to fight them unless I want to fight them. And I don't want to be forced to fight them. Like, the worst thing you can do with that secondary is take it against someone who has, like, characters that can hide and that are hard to get to. And Custodes characters are very hard to, like, kill. So you literally get a Custodes player that goes, oh, is this the middle of the table? And there's 4 quarters here. I could put 1 character in the middle of the table, 1 in each quarter. And then you just don't get any Herd the Prey points ever. Yeah, so you have to be very careful with that. Yeah.
And then also with Engage, what you're doing, what I guess what you're doing, or what is you're moving them further away from these objectives with such an elite army, right? So you're kind of playing the board a little bit, where you're putting like units out on like weird areas where they have to, get rid of them
Yeah.
and position, right?
Yeah, I love when I'm playing with the Dark Eldar. I love playing angles on the table. Like I try and come at my opponent from as many different angles as possible, and try and split them up as much as possible. And a lot of the times that allows me to get local superiority in an area of the board, and like then converge on like a smaller 200 point unit, but with like 600 points of my army,
Yeah.
right? And then murder it, and
Yeah.
then like pick another unit that's isolated, and then go for that one, right?
So, yeah, so you're not choosing Herd the Prey against Custodes, but you still feel like it's comfortable to choose against Tau, even though they can be so tanky with their crisis suits?
I can kill a unit of crisis suits. You know, like my list will kill a full tank, like buffed unit of crisis suits with like the tools that I have. It's just a matter of it's just a matter of the deployment style, really.
Yeah.
So you know, a lot of the times against Tau, I'd probably take something like Stranglehold or Engage instead of Herd the Prey, just because they can be really annoying, and like sometimes I want to hide more than fight. But if you want them to come to you, Herd the Prey is a great choice because. But a lot of the times, Tau players are coming to you anyway, so you want to try and do something else, right?
And I feel like that's another thing that's really strong about Drukhari that a lot of people don't recognize is that their secondaries are so flexible. Like you can always choose different secondaries with this army and still do incredibly well, just because they do kind of like what you said. You know, they play the mission really well, so you're able to have all this flexibility. Whereas you look at another army where it's like, well, I can only use these two secondaries. If I can't score it on these two secondaries, then my entire game plan kind of crumbles apart. But Drukhari's different because you have Herd the Prey, right, which is a good secondary, and then you know you can flip flop between other ones.
Yeah. You know, it's good to have options. I feel like adding in something like, you know, the Harlequin Patrol all of a sudden opens up like the Psychic secondary tree, which I think is incredibly powerful and useful. You know, that Shadow Seer gives you access to Psychic Interrogation, you know, a variety of different ones. And it's always good to have those options as a Drukhari player, because a lot of times you're going for, you know, Herd the Prey, Engage, or Strangle, depending on who you're playing against. Then on the flip side, you're taking either banners or retrieve data, or maybe teleport homers, depending on what you want, but usually retrieve Necromund. And this is from the GT 2022 pack.
Yeah.
And then the third one is really the up in the air one. It's one of the reasons I've built to the last into my list, because I find I'm taking it a lot, and my initial lists had the wrong units to do it with, which was like my Hellions. And I want to like send them forward to get like murdered. So so now I feel like the list is a lot stronger, being able to rely on that secondary. But then adding in like Harlequins would give you access to that whole secondary psychic tree, and not have to rely on your opponent's list to get points, which I think is a huge part of playing Drukhari properly. Is you want to take the agency away from your opponent. Like, I don't want my opponent to have control over how I score my points. I want to be able to control how I score my points in the game.
And that's another reason why I really like To the Last also, and building for To the Last, is just because you just add more flexibility to your army, right? Like if you're like, oh, there's no way that you're going to kill this unit. Absolutely no way. Then it's just free 15 points, and it's great. So what's it like playing Drukhari into less strong armies? We touched upon this like a little bit, but how did you go about playing Drukhari into less strong armies? And did you pull a lot of your punches? How do you deal with people who aren't basically having a fun time playing against your Drukhari army?
That's a social contract question.
Yeah.
So, you know, it depends. Like if I'm going to a tournament and I play and I get paired up on round one against somebody who's playing Chaos Space Marines, and they're, you know, they just started playing Chaos Space Marines and they like it. I always give my opponent the respect that I'm going to assume that they play as well as I do, or as well as like Nick Nadavati does, or as well as, you know, as well as these top players do. So I'm going to deploy well. I'm going to pick the right secondaries. I'm not going to like pull punches in that sense. And then you can, usually what happens is you play one or two turns and you can tell the game's like
going in one way or another.
It's going one way or another. And at that point, it's more about making sure that you teach the opponent, like the person who you're playing with, something like go through things, give them like advice on whatever, like how to move or like picking targets and that's only if they want it, of course.
Yeah,
But at the same time, it's about maybe, I don't know, challenge that warlord to single combat and run your Archon up the middle of the board and like try and get into combat with Lucius or whatever, and like, and have like a one-on-one hand-to-hand combat that has no relevancy with scoring points in the game, but it's more of a cinematic moment. But then if you're at top, like if you're at the top of an event, you're playing the other person who's going 3-0 or 4-0 or whatever, and they're playing Chaos Space Marines, like, well, they're good. They made it there. I'm not going to pull punches at that point.
Yeah.
They might not enjoy that they have to play against Drukhari in the final round, but they know what they signed up for.
No, I definitely understand.
On the contrast, if you're playing for fun, like with friends, like, I don't know, like I'll play random stuff. I played a game at the height of Drukhari power where I literally rolled for everything. I rolled for my warlord traits. I rolled for my relic. I rolled for my obsessions. Like I literally rolled for my secondaries. Yeah. I rolled for everything just to be like, well, I've got a crazy good book. I'm just going to have no control and see what I can make with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And challenge myself.
That sounds cool. I like that idea of just like, it's like you understand that you have a strong codex, but you're still trying to find a way to still play an army that you really enjoy against somebody, but just like taking like, small, pulling your punches just like a little bit, depending on how you're feeling with your social contract, right?
It's all about that social contract, right? If your opponent's not having fun, right, then they're going to shake hands with you. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. When don't ever force somebody to play a game they don't want to play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if they don't want to play, like, you can't make them play that game. You know what I mean? And a lot of the times people get invested and they get frustrated when, it doesn't go their way or they feel they have no way of winning or whatnot. And that can be frustrating. And as a person who's playing a very, like, a good army, it can feel really bad. Like when your friends around you just like constantly like poop all over you for playing this good faction. And even, and then you haven't even rolled a single dice and they've already been like talking for 45 minutes about how busted your army is. Yeah. And you haven't even started the game. It can be really like psychologically like just a weight, you know what I mean? And it's not fun. And, I've been there and I know people who are there right now with Tau and Custodes. And it's not easy to kind of try and be like that uplifting, being like, you haven't even rolled a dice yet. You have no idea how this game is going to go. And if you say that you have no chance, then you have no chance. It's that mentality is like so important in this game. And I will die on that hill.
Yeah, because like for all you know, I could just like do some dumb stuff, and you don't even know what I was gonna do. Like I could just
you have no idea.
Yeah.
Like I've had games where I'm like, oh, this raider's gonna die. Like 10 last cannons later, how is this raider still alive? Yeah. Like you have no idea what's gonna happen in the game.
Definitely. So we're heading towards the end of this episode, but what are some new codexes that you're most afraid of for Drukhari that are coming up soon? We still have a couple more codexes in the bank that are going to be releasing. Which ones are you the most afraid of?
Well, Tau's historically the one I'm most afraid of because of the fact that they have like all the right tools to kill every model in my army. So that's probably the toughest one for me. Eldar, as soon as people start going back to the out of line of sight night spinner and little platform out of line of sight shooting, that's probably one of the ones the lists I'm more terrified of seeing. I can play Custodes and Harlequins all night long, but if you can sit behind a wall and kill my raiders and my venoms, I can't hide from you. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And then of course I'd like to say Tyranids, but Tyranids are always a good fight, and I really enjoy playing against Tyranids. But I will say, when Knights come out, whenever that is, I'm very curious to see how that works. Because historically, Dark Lances are terrible against Knights.
Yeah.
Because They have invul saves, you 50-50 shot of wounding them on average, and and if they make their saves, like they just table you. You know what I mean? And if they change the mechanic for knights to be able to hold objectives, kind of like what they did with the warglaves, or who knows, they might change that in the book. I have no idea. If they can play the mission and then they're still really hard to kill and take down, and they can still table you really fast, I feel like that's a tough matchup for Drukhari sometimes.
Yeah, I can see that. So for people that want to start off Drukhari, like what do you recommend them getting? So this is like actually a 2-part question. So there's people who starting off with Drukhari, what do you recommend them getting? This is like, imagine somebody that's just like brand spanking new into the game, right? And they're like, I like Drukhari, they look cool, I like their aesthetic. What do you recommend getting for them? And then for the people that want to be more competitive, what do you recommend for them? And those are people that have been playing Drukhari for a little bit and want to try to be more competitive with them. What do you recommend?
That's a great question. So the start collecting box is fantastic. If you can go into like a game store that is like an old hole in the wall, and like, it's like a little cave, and not very many people go into it, and you can find one of the old start collecting boxes, those are the best. The one with like the Raider and the Cabalite Warriors and stuff, like that was a fantastic start collecting box. So that's a great place to start. Ideally, like with any faction, you have to look at it and say, am I going to enjoy building this and painting it?
Yeah.
Right? If it looks cool, that's what I would go with. I'd say, if it looks cool, just buy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you do make sure you have an HQ of some sort. Like, you have to pick either you want to go Cabal, Witch Cult, or Coven. Sure. You can eventually pick all three. But the Cabal is usually the more user-friendly, in the sense that it's more readily available. And then just make sure you have some troops, have some transports, and have some firepower, whether it's like a Ravager or some Scourge with guns or something like that. There's some really cool models to take from. As for more competitive, I think over time, just try and get a little bit of everything, because you never know what's going to be good, especially in the Drukhari. There's so many options that it fluctuates. However, as of right now, I highly recommend you get a couple of Helion units, because they're really good.
Do you want to explain why they're so good?
So Helions they're very, very fast, and they hit very hard. They're not the most durable unit, but in combination with a supplement that's from the Book of Rust, Book 1 of the Warzone Octaris, is that right?
I think it was Octaris.
Yeah, the Octaris Warzone Book 1, Book of Rust, there's a supplement for the Cult of Strife. And Helions are witch cult units, so they get to benefit from all of that Strife stuff. So reroll wound rolls and extra AP and an invulnerable save after they kill something. It gives you something that can hit really hard and trade with some of the tougher units in the game, with good damage output and great speed. They're also infantry, which is a fantastic keyword in the game, which allows them to do actions and actually perform mission objectives and things like that as well. So they're not just for killing.
Yeah.
But I just love,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say, which is very, very important, especially for Nachmund right now, right? Because you have so many missions that require you to do these actions, and you don't want to waste like things like your characters doing actions, because then that's going to turn off their auras, things like that. So having just extra chaff always helps out, right?
Yeah, so they can be taken in a squad of 5 to 20. Currently, I'm running 2 squads of 8. But if you want them to be killy, you need to have it from 8 to 10. If you want to be crazy, you can have one big block of 20, and then hopefully you can hide them behind something, because they're very hard to hide.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, taking a look at some of the Coven stuff, mainly for utility, right? So either Prophets of Flesh, I'm taking it for the Vexator Mask, which is a relic that allows you to pick a unit within 3 to fight last, which is a cool mechanic to have in the game. So in close combat, you can basically make them not fight until you fight, or essentially. And deny Overwatch, which is really useful into like Tau and other like armies that can like kill you when you charge into them, which is important to be able to shut that down. And then a good and building that in combination is really powerful. If you can find some Harlequins and you really want to be competitive, like Harlequins do give you an added layer, but that's no longer Drukhari. That's like using the allies and then kind of like going into the Croftwell book and really kind of looking at fine tuning, like point for point what you're getting, which is also an option if you really want to get into it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I absolutely love the Harlequins book. I think it's so much fun. So yeah, even with like Harlequins and stuff, like what you were saying before, Harlequins, you could put them in with Drukhari, but like you said, it's not Drukhari anymore. Now you're doing allied stuff, you're souping things. It might make
which arguably is more competitive. You know what I mean? Like arguably you get better tools because it's a newer book and things like that. But that's really up to you. And like, because when you want to play competitively or narratively, you just have to set like parameters and goals for yourself. You know what I mean? Like you have to understand, okay, do you just want to win? Does it matter how much you spend to like win? Like, do you just want to just always take the best thing all the time? Like if that's your goal, then by all means, go do that. Or do you want to try and be the best with something that you can be and then limit yourself within that framework, which I like to do because I'm crazy that way.
Yeah, and it makes you feel just a tad bit feeling of accomplishment, right? Like it's just like, yeah, I did that, and I did it without taking like the strongest thing. And there's nothing that really beats that, right? When you are the underdog and you're able to just like pull one out on something that you're not supposed to win against, it always feels good, right? All right, cool. So that's going to be it for this episode. It was very, very insightful listening to you and seeing, like, kind of just picking your brain on how you feel about Drukhari as of right now comparatively to what it was before. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you, man?
Well, I do YouTube videos. So you can find me at youtube.com/scaredcast. And that's SKAREDCAST on YouTube. I do battle reports. I do some meta-analysis, I do a whole bunch of stuff, and then all the links to like Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter is all on there. So I hope to see you there and leave me a comment and let me know you popped by.
Yeah, and if you guys are just listening to this podcast, you're not watching the video, you guys won't notice this, but he's even wearing a shirt that says Scaredcast. Look at that.
The old school one. Right
Boom!
There. Boom.
Is that merch available? Can people buy that?
Not this one, but the other one. The newer one.
Yeah.
The newer one that looks cooler that has the logo on it. This is like old school. I made this like 10 years ago. It's old.
You can feel the old school on it.
This is one of these t-shirts that you wear and you're like, it's fit my body for a long time. Yeah. So it's like perfectly just,
it's meshed with you. Yeah. All right then. As for myself, you can find me over on Dice Check. That's youtube.com/Dice Check. All that good stuff. And yeah, thank you guys for watching this episode or listening to this episode of Chapter Tactics. And we'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye.